So is the world seeming like it's gone nuts? Is it seeming crazy? Is it seeming a lot less stable than it perhaps has been? Now, I'm going to be 49 on Sunday, so I grew up, my childhood I was born in 1973, so my childhood years that I really remember were the late 70s, the 80s, and as a teenager, the early 90s, and then I was getting into my 20s. Now, I sometimes look back and I think, wow, times were so different then. Everything was so much simpler. Everything seemed so much more stable. In fact, even up until maybe a decade ago, 15 years ago, I don't know, things are changing and things are changing fast. You notice that, right? Is it just that it seems there's more instability in the world, or is there more instability, more rapid change occurring in the world? Okay. I always think about the film The Matrix, right? There's a scene in the film The Matrix where Agent Smith is interrogating Neo, and he explains to Neo that they built this, the first Matrix was a paradise, but the people inside of it kept waking up. They kept rebelling. Their minds rebelled against absolute perfection. So they rebuilt this second Matrix, which reflected what Agent Smith referred to as the peak of human civilization, the late 1990s. Now, I remember the late 1990s very, very fondly. I'm not going to say that was the peak of human civilization, but it might have been peak comfort, certainly for us in the Western world. Okay, this is a very Eurocentric view, maybe Anglosphere-centric view. Okay, now I live in Europe, and up until maybe the Second World War, Europe was pretty much constantly at war for thousands of years. Okay, constant conflict, hard times, difficult times. And then after the Second World War, there was a consensus around peace, and we had an unprecedented era of growth, prosperity, and comfort. So we kind of reached peak comfort. Now we've entered a different world now because for a variety of different reasons, partly because of technology. Technology has advanced and interconnected us on a global scale. What you've got is a much more complex psychosocial information system that we live inside of. And the thing about complexity is complexity, it can be quite adaptive sometimes, but it can also lead to instability. Okay, so the more interconnected the world is, the more interconnected we all are, and the more you get different factions more able to apply their will through this interconnection, the more instability you get. Okay, add to that constantly evolving technology, okay, which creates new possibilities we haven't seen before. But those possibilities, the fruits of those possibilities, are not always evenly distributed. Anyway, the world's changing fast. You probably noticed. I've seen a lot of people in kind of fear and panic and that kind of thing about some of the changes that are occurring at the moment. But I want to bring a different perspective to things, because if you look at the news too much, or even alternative news or whatever, there's people telling you stuff all the time that can be kind of alarming, and you can think, what's happening to my way of life? What's happening to my way of life? That's what people are often afraid of. A disruption to their way of life. This video is sponsored by the podcast on adaptive psychology and results creation, Conversations with Tripp and Crow. There's an equation for living from Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Expose yourself to serendipity, leverage the upsides, and mitigate the downsides. So I know that oftentimes if you don't have a conversation with somebody, you're pretty much guaranteed that nothing's going to come of it. If you do have a conversation with somebody, well, maybe nothing will come of it anyway. Maybe something will come of it. Maybe something wonderful will come from it. Maybe something will unfold that you never saw coming.
This is Conversations with Tripp and Crow.
Now, I call this video, As the World Changes, Don't Get Dashed on the Rocks. And the question is, what is it that we need to know? How is it that we need to be? What are the skills? What are the understandings? What is it that we need to ensure that we do not get dashed on the rocks as the world changes? Now, I'm going to share with you some ideas that sort of come from complexity theory. That doesn't mean complicated, that's something else. Complexity, where you've got a lot of different interdependent parts interacting in unpredictable ways, non-linear ways. You have complexity. Things are very, very difficult to control, very, very difficult to predict inside of complex systems, and the world is becoming an ever more complex system. I want to look at this as in relation to basic human cognition, right? Because you've got a brain, and this is the center of your adaptive capacity for the world. Okay, now, the way we work as individuals, we adapt to the world, right? We adapt to the context of our lives. We are very adaptive creatures, and we become adapted. This is an important distinction, adapted versus adaptive. I'm going to get to this. So as we go through life, we learn what we need to learn. We learn to become the way we need to become in order to fit into the niches of our life. So we find a way of adapting to our family and social situations. For some, that's harder than others, but we all find a way. We find our place, we find our niche. We may not like how we're adapted, but we adapt. We get work, we get employment, we adapt to new work roles, this kind of thing. Maybe we choose to work for ourselves. We become an entrepreneur of some kind, and we adapt to living our life that way. I'm thinking about Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant, going from employed to self-employed to business owner to investor. Okay, each one of those four areas requires a different adaptation. Now, what do I mean by adaptation? An adaptation is a set of skills and understandings grounded in a way of being that enables you to operate well within a particular context. So you can see that we need to become adapted in order to be able to live our lives well. We need to become adapted to the relevant context. In fact, I've said this before elsewhere. When I was a teenager, and I hated school, and I was really looking forward to getting out of school because I thought I was going to be free. And of course I got out of school and I wasn't free. I had to get a job, I had to make money, I had to do all of these things. I was extremely distressed about this because the world seemed like a crazy place. And I thought, why, I didn't sign up for this. That's what I used to say. I didn't sign up for this. Then I had an epiphany one day that the world is not going to reorganize itself to suit my needs. I need to reorganize myself to fit with the world, quote unquote, okay? Or the elements of my life. Now, that doesn't mean selling myself out. It meant finding my way to adapt, okay? Taking charge, taking ownership of my own adaptation, my own transformation, my own change. So that was a huge thing for me. Now, here's the thing. Adaptation, there's two phases to adaptation, right? There's what you might call exploration, and then there's exploitation. Okay, so think about this if you entered a new job or a new sphere of work, right? Somewhere you'd never worked before. Maybe you got into banking or something like that. You're in a whole new context and you have to learn, you have to adapt. So you have to explore with your mind, you have to look at things in a variety of different ways. This is exploration, and you have to build maps, build understandings that help you make sense of that context and enable you to operate. Okay, so that's the exploration phase. It's exploration and learning. Then you've got exploitation. So once you've adapted to that situation, you've got understandings, you've got skills, you can now exploit them to create the outcomes that you want. So you've got exploration and exploitation. That's exploration to create a map, a set of understandings, and then the exploitation of that map and that set of understandings to create the outcomes that you want. Okay? So that is basically how we adapt. That is the essence of adaptedness. Once we have come to a position where we can exploit what we know about a particular given context. Now, this works really well if you have a fixed landscape, what you might call a fixed landscape. What that means is the context you're adapting to isn't really changing, okay, or a very slowly changing landscape. Right? As soon as the landscape that you're adapting to, right, or the niche that you're adapting to, so to speak, starts to shift, you have to do a bit more exploration and relearning, okay, to upgrade your adaptedness, to continue to be adapted, okay? So you have to put some more energy back on exploration as soon as the context starts to change. And while you're putting the energy on exploration, you can't put your energy on the exploitation, right? Now, What we're entering, or what we have entered, is an era where the landscapes that we are adapting to are often starting to change so quickly, they become what you might call a dancing landscape. Now, once you've got a dancing landscape, what do? This process of exploration, adaptation, then exploitation, it's constantly being thrown out of kilter, right? And this can lead to, for a lot of people who are used to living in a world that's a lot more stable, this can lead to a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, which tends to have us hang back and lay low and, you know, rather than engage with the world and get busy creating the results that we want. But how do we create the results that we want if the landscape we're constantly trying to adapt to is constantly changing? How do we do that? Well, the key is to shift your focus from adaptedness to adaptiveness. Okay? So adaptiveness chunks up a logical level and it starts to put your focus on the skills and understandings you need to be able to change and change rapidly, to be able to dance with the dancing landscape, so to speak. Okay, so there are some skills, attributes, understandings that are always going to serve you. They're always going to be something you can carry with you into whatever context you go in order to be able to work well with that context, even if it's full of surprises, even if it's full of unknown stuff, this kind of thing. Now, there's a concept that's really served me well in my life. It's the concept of grounding or groundedness. Okay, so groundedness is the state, for me, it's the state of being that emerges from what I would call grounding. Now, you can have context-specific grounding or you can have generalized grounding. Let me explain what I mean by this. In my room here, I had my first client in my room, not on Zoom, since before lockdown yesterday. So I used to get clients come to me here. They'd fly into Edinburgh Airport. They would come and visit me, and you have to cross a number of busy intersections on the way here. And I often used to say to people, I'd say, you know, because people often say, oh, I need more confidence, this kind of thing. And that's something that people think they need. It's what I call a holy grail concept, confidence. People don't actually need it, and it isn't really a state. But that's not what this video is about. So people would come in here, and we would sometimes be talking about confidence. And I say, did you cross that intersection outside on your way in, the junction outside? And they go, yeah. I'd say, so were you full of confidence before you did it? They go, no. I say, were you fearful? No. So what were you then? I don't know. I just crossed the road, right? And the truth of the matter is what they did is they've got enough of an understanding of that context, crossing the road, junctions, this kind of thing, intersections, that they are grounded in that understanding and knowledge. So they don't need confidence and they don't have fear or insecurity, right? They have in that context a state of groundedness coming from a grounding in their understanding of how things work in that context, right? So grounding is a grounding in a set of understandings. What it creates is a state of being called groundedness. Most people have context-specific grounding and groundedness. There are certain contexts in their life that they are adapted to, they have understanding for, so they get to be grounded in that situation and have groundedness. But then they get thrown into a different situation and they don't have the groundedness anymore, or the grounding, and they get flustered and they don't know how to operate, right? But that's because of what they're grounding in. They're grounding in the specifics of the context, not what they are bringing to the context. So here's the thing that's always true in a dancing landscape. If you find yourself in a dancing landscape or in an ever-changing world, it's always you that's there, right? Wherever you go, here you are. So if you want to develop adaptiveness and groundedness, i.e. the ability to be grounded, solid, fluid, adaptive, in flow, creative, bringing your best self to any situation, even if it's unpredictable, you don't know what's going to happen. The thing that you want to have a grounding in is your own personal psychosocial skill set and understanding set. Right? Because this is the thing we're going to carry everywhere. This is the one thing that is absolutely going to remain true. Whatever craziness goes on in the world, you are a person and you will be dealing with other people regularly. Right? So this is psychosocial stuff. Right? Psychosocial stuff. I've got this psychosocial skills, psychosocial understandings. Right? And this starts from in here. Understanding your own psychology, having skill within yourself to not hold on when things start changing, because you need to let go and you need to flow, right? To be able to influence your own inner state, to be able to influence your own response, to be able to be adaptive in the perspectives you take, to be able to move in a variety of different ways within any given situation. I mean, psychologically move in a variety of different ways, right? That's the psycho side of psychosocial, the psychological. The other side is how you connect with other people, right? How you create with them, how you influence them, how you respond to them. If you can take this wherever you need to go, right? And if you can always find a center point, a touchstone of solidity, that groundedness, you can bring it everywhere. You have transcended the need for adaptedness. Not that adaptedness isn't useful, it's still useful, but you don't need it. You don't need to cling on to it because you have adaptiveness, right? This means you're grounded wherever you go. It means you're able to create with whatever comes up. And this is of incredible value. Now, I'm not going to sit here and go, so here are the 5 steps to adaptiveness and groundedness, okay? It isn't really about 5 steps. It's about deepening your understanding. It's about deepening your knowledge, and it's about developing certain skills. Okay? So I'm going to leave the video at this point here. I'm just going to say a couple of things at the end here. You'll probably find a link somewhere around here to my program, The Nexus, which you're most welcome to join if you're interested in developing your groundedness, your adaptiveness, your ability to create with whatever comes up in your life, and mastering your own personal psychology and your ability to dance psychosocially with other people, influence outcomes, this kind of thing. Create with the people around you. If you're interested in that, you'll find a link to that, The Nexus. Beyond that, I probably put an insert in here as well. Have a new podcast coming out. Maybe I'll play out with some clips with the podcast, which is going to be a regular thing. It's me and Alex Crow. We are discussing all aspects of personal adaptiveness, personal mastery, this kind of stuff. And it's what we're looking for it to be is driven by your questions. Okay, the people that end up following the podcast. So I'm going to ask you a question right up front. I might have put an insert in here asking the same question, but I'm going to ask it again right now. If there were one question that you had, the answer to which would make a massive difference to you, right? In being who you need to be, how you need to be, or dealing with whatever's coming your way in life, what would that question be? What is the question that would make the biggest difference to you, the answer to which would make the biggest difference to you right now? If you put that in the comments below, Alex and I will go through those comments and we'll pull out the most generative questions and we'll bring them into a very near future podcast. Aside from all of that, if this video has stimulated your thinking in any way whatsoever, please do give it a like, give it a thumbs up. Helps the algorithm do good things with these videos. And if you've got any other questions as well regarding any of what I've covered here, make use of that comment section. And I look forward to when we next connect. There's an equation for living from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which he talks about in the 10th anniversary edition of his book, The Black Swan. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but if I was going to give you a piece of advice, it would be this. Expose yourself to serendipity, leverage the upsides, and mitigate the downsides. You cannot connect the dots looking forward, only looking back, to quote Steve Jobs. So I know that oftentimes if you don't have a conversation with somebody, you're pretty much guaranteed that nothing's going to come of it. If you do have a conversation with somebody, well, maybe nothing will come of it anyway. Maybe something will come of it. Maybe something wonderful will come from it. Maybe something will unfold that you never saw coming.
This is Conversations with Tripp and Crow.